I've experienced this firsthand, and I see time and time again, whether it's friends, colleagues, clients, experiencing this. And I feel that there's a real misconception that as a woman, if you want to reach that level in your career, and I see so many women that are absolutely amazing at what they do. They're getting the promotions. They don't need any help to do that because they're insanely skilled, talented, and hardworking. But the misconception bit comes with the fact that you need to do that whilst working yourself into the ground, that becoming that go-to expert in your role and achieving that senior position has to come at the cost. It has to come at the cost of your mental health, your well-being, your work-life balance. And so that really, really forms the heart of my work.
Is lack of self-belief holding you back in your career? Pushing yourself too hard, stress at work, burnout, imposter experience, low self-belief are all unfortunately common issues that many of us have faced or will face in our careers. And they are certainly big challenges for new leaders who want to be seen as effective and successful managers. My guest today is on a mission to help women in particular to face down some of these challenges. Her name is Camilla De Burghe, and she is an accredited career coach with a 14-year corporate background in urban design. Camilla feels passionately that every woman deserves to love their career and become a go-to expert in their role, but without having to work themselves into the ground. She loves working with her clients to help them cultivate calm, kindness, and self-belief in their working day. We'll be talking about all of that and more today, including the specific challenges that women face in their careers, what great leadership looks like, the role and the power of coaching. And it's a really deep conversation about how leaders can create more successful workplaces where people love their jobs. And after all, isn't that why most of us become leaders?
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Camilla, thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm pleased to hear it. And thanks for joining us again. Yeah. And to kick us off, over to you. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself, your background, your career so far, what you do today, why you do it, and so on.
Oh, lots of exciting questions to get started. So, hi everyone, I'm Camilla, and in short, I am a career coach and I help women in the built environment to love their career. And I do this by helping them to cultivate calm, kindness, and self-belief in their working week. Now, I must admit, I've had a bit of a different route to coaching. So I actually did my degree in architecture at uni. Turned out that wasn't for me. That's probably definitely a very long story for another day. So I ended up doing a master's in urban design, and I graduated in the middle of the recession in 2009. So that wasn't a particularly easy time to be searching for jobs. And the only thing that I could get was this 3-week work experience placement. So I started this work experience placement determined to basically never leave, and that pretty much worked. And I stayed there for 14 years. So I'd chalk that one up as a win. And really, I think having graduated in the recession and it being so tough to find a job, it gave me that drive. And I knew that I did love what I did at the time in terms of working as an urban designer. And I worked really, really hard. I took responsibility and ownership for projects. I got myself noticed for the right reasons. And I put a lot of time and effort into learning those key skills associated with my job role. And so by the time that I got to 27, I'd bagged a position as an associate. So I was one of the youngest associates to ever be promoted to that position in the company. And on paper, technically, I had this amazing job and my dream salary. I did incredible things. The day-to-day was never the same. I was even being taken on private jets by clients to say thank you for all of my hard work, went to some incredible sporting events. There was so much to be grateful for. And when I got to that time, I thought, right, I'm going to continue to put my foot on the gas, and I want to become a director by the time I'm 30. That's what I really, really want to focus on. But the only problem with all of this was that I had been ignoring some serious, serious red flags. And even on my journey to associate, I had put a lot of pressure on myself to get there. I wasn't very nice to myself. I had this real pressure in my head that I needed to be perfect. I worked crazy hours. I traveled around the country when I needed to. I lived out of hotel rooms. And so I made sacrifices in terms of relationships, times with friends, times with family. And there was this sort of what I would describe as this melting pot of pressure. And so I pursued that path to directorship, having ignored these red flags. And the real summary of what happened was that my mental health just said no. And I ended up in a really, really dark place in terms of my mental health, in terms of my well-being. I was definitely incredibly burnt out. And I had a really, really tough day. I had a conversation with our HR department, just an informal one, about that route to directorship. And I realised that I was really, really struggling. But I also, at that point, really, really didn't know the support that I needed to put in place for myself to really, really take myself out of this hole. And at the time, mentoring was a bit of a thing. Coaching definitely wasn't a thing. And I worked in a very male-dominated industry. There were a lack of female role models, especially female role models that were at directorship or partner level. And I just couldn't find that support. And it led me to a very difficult journey. And to sort of put that in context, that journey was about 7 years of where I had to come to terms with the fact that pursuing a directorship position was not in the interests of my mental health and my happiness. And if I kept placing that focus on climbing the career ladder, instead of really looking at how I could love my career, I was going to end up in an even worse place. And potentially just be at the point of just being completely signed off. I was in a really, really dark place. So I went on that journey, and I spent a lot of time thinking about what I had loved in my career, and a lot of that was supporting and mentoring female colleagues. And I found out about coaching, and I thought, I'll give this a go. I'd also realised that I'd become way too comfortable with my skill set over the years, and I hadn't really ventured into any personal or professional development. So I thought, I'm going to take a leap. I'm going to put myself on a coaching course. And do you know what? As soon as I started it, I absolutely loved it, and I never looked back. So I trained to become a coach. I set up my business and I worked part-time. And then in autumn last year, I took the leap and I went full-time.
Wow. Okay. So a few questions to follow on from that.
Yes.
The built environment, what does that mean?
That's a great question. So in terms of what I define as the built environment, so it's women in design roles, or anyone in design roles for that matter. So something like architecture, urban design, landscape architecture and landscape design. It could range anywhere through to town planning. It could range from anywhere to the construction and the development side of things. So house builders, engineers, construction workers. So that's how I would define the built environment.
Always like to get into the terminology from different industries and make sure we understand it all. An unfortunately familiar story as well when it comes to the burnout and that sort of thing. Did you find, I mean, it's certainly something I noticed, which for me was a big kind of red flag, warning sign, wake up call, whatever you like, that I was going through burnout, was the fact that even when you weren't at work, all you talked about was work. That for me was that kind of moment of realization of, hang on, like nobody wants to hear me complain about work all the time every time I see them. And yet I still keep doing that and I can't seem to stop doing that.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And I almost went a step further as well. And I come from an incredibly academic family where I realized that I tied all of my self-worth to work as well. So as well as being generally obsessed with it and it taking over my life in a physical and mental sense, I almost had this additional bind of constantly feeling like if I'm not a success, if I don't get that next promotion, then I've failed. And I really didn't realize or celebrate the fact that there's so much more to myself and everything that makes me amazing than my work achievements. And I just didn't realize that at all.
Absolutely. And I think there's a really good lesson in there for leaders too about how you are supporting your people at work. And part of that has to be about the whole person and not letting them just make work their identity. While managers, bosses might see that as a positive of like, yeah, I want them to be all about work because then I'm getting the most out of them. They're working hard all the time. Actually, I think leaders realize that's not the best and you're not going to get the best if you do treat people that way.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a bit modern. I don't know.
No, I definitely agree with that though. And, you know, yes, understanding that person, who they are in the workplace and outside of the workplace, and the best version of themselves that can come to work. And also, I think it's so important for leaders to celebrate those amazing strengths and skills and see if someone is insanely skilled, talented, or just has a really enjoyable hobby outside of work, how they can bring some of those skills and that learning into work.
Yeah, definitely. And giving them space to think about things that aren't work as well. And I mean, it's even like the simple things, like we've probably all worked for someone who you try and book a day off and the first response is they'll cut or ask why or try and negotiate. It's like, well, no, you know, I'm entitled to some time off. I want my time off, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, yeah, it's the small things sometimes, I think, that can have a really big impact.
Massively, yes.
Yeah. So tell us more then about your process, if you like, and how you help women in the built environment to love their careers again.
Really, for me, the background to this, and don't get me wrong, I think this is incredibly common amongst a lot of sectors and a lot of fields, but I've experienced this firsthand, and I see time and time again, whether it's friends, colleagues, clients, experiencing this. And I feel that there's a real misconception that as a woman, if you want to reach that level in your career, and I see so many women that are absolutely amazing at what they do. They're getting the promotion. They don't need any help to do that because they're insanely skilled, talented, and hardworking. But the misconception bit comes with the fact that you need to do that whilst working yourself into the ground, that becoming that go-to expert in your role and achieving that senior position has to come at the cost. It has to come at the cost of your mental health, your well-being, your work-life balance. And so that really, really forms the heart of my work, that I help women to see that they can reach that level. The sky is the limit in terms of their career, but they can do that whilst treating themselves with kindness and compassion. So really the way that I love to work, and really what informs all of my work, is what I call my 5-step framework that helps women to love their careers. So the first one is all about finding that career that makes you truly happy, because my story really taught me that if you lose that love for your career, you can end up in such a dark place. And it's having that sense check, helping women to see their motivation. Does their job align with their values? Actually, how is their current role serving them? Or we're also very good at sort of sitting on those little niggling suspicions where we are waking up for work knowing that our job isn't quite right. And we do have that little dream in our head that goes, oh, I wish I could do this. But we keep a little lid on it. So that's the first step, is really, really helping women to understand how their current career is serving them in terms of giving them that love and that happiness. The second step is all about believing the value that you bring to your role. And this really ties into confidence and imposter syndrome. I still find the stat, I think one of the most recent stats is the fact that nearly 80% of women struggle with their confidence in the workplace. And really part of that is just not believing that you're good enough, having that horrible stomach dropping, put my teeth in feeling when you're going, oh my goodness, I've got to do this meeting. I've got to do this pitch. Am I going to do this? I've just said this. Is this right? Oh, I don't know if I should speak up because am I going to say the wrong thing? So there's a massive piece around really, really, truly believing that the value that you bring to your role. Thirdly is work-life balance. So that is the part about realizing that you don't have to work yourself into the ground. It's not going to end up in a place that serves you or your career in the long run. And it's really, really helping women to curate that work-life balance that works for them. Boundaries are a key part as well. We've all been at work and we've all worked with perhaps colleagues, managers, leaders who are, oh, can you just stay and do that? Could you possibly work that weekend? Could you travel there? And actually that's your evening gone because you've got to travel overnight. So it's really understanding about what those boundaries look like and also just be comfortable communicating them. Another step is becoming that go-to expert in your role. And I certainly found throughout my career, the key skills just kept ramping up. And actually, in the first 5 years, they were very much associated with my job role, whether it was drawing, sending emails, writing reports. But actually, when I got to that associate position, the skills required were much more entrepreneurial, when actually I was expected to bring a certain amount of money into the business. And that was a completely new skill set to develop that I then needed to take on to a directorship role. So, and a lot of workplaces now do provide fantastic support, but it's also okay to just need that bit of extra support to just help you just get over maybe that challenge that's being presented by a key skill stopping you, that is just feeling again really niggly, and you're just going, I just want to master that to get to that next promotion. So that is something really important as well. And lastly, something again which I've seen a lot is setting yourself up for success. And I see incredible women on this massive trajectory. The trajectory is just rocketing upwards, but the issue is they don't have that right support around them. And it needs to go, in my opinion, a lot further than perhaps having a colleague or a manager that you can reach out to. Obviously, we know more about mentoring, we know about coaching, and what in their lifestyle. So again, this ties in really strongly with work-life balance. What in their lifestyle needs to happen so that they can turn up to work feeling like the best version of themselves and not going home feeling ridiculously drained, tired, fed up, because all of that is going to snowball into a really, really difficult place in your career. So that's how I love to help women. That sort of concept, that 5-step framework is embedded in my one-to-one coaching packages. And I also love to work with women-led community platforms. I've got a few collaborations going on at the minute, and also businesses, whether it's guest speaking, coaching, mentoring, training, and of course, one-to-one coaching as well.
Do you love a 5-step process? But I think, for anyone almost in any role, particularly new to leadership, I think there are some themes there that most people who've had a job will recognise. Yeah. And I do wonder sometimes whether that is saying something about our work society and the way we approach our jobs just generally.
Yeah.
Obviously, with the industry that you've worked in, I think it's true with STEM careers as well.
Yes.
Particularly, women generally are underrepresented. And when they are in those careers, they feel this pressure that they have to work that much harder and be that much better. Whereas, maybe you've heard the cliche about why there's so many incompetent men in management positions when there's so many excellent women being overlooked. And it is a problem. Why do you think it is a problem, particularly in the industry that you've worked in and more generally?
Well, that is an amazing question.
A difficult question as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there's so much more research that I can do, but I'm really, really trying to understand, because this is a question that you're asking, and I've heard global organizations asking this question as well. I don't feel like this is a fully resolved question, but for me, from some of the research that I've done, it is effectively statistically proven that as a woman is climbing that path to leadership, and if you imagine that good old career ladder, which I don't necessarily love, but it's a helpful image to have in your mind, where a man would climb that ladder, a woman would have to hop over at least one broken rung. So that's an image in your mind of how all of the research and the statistics points to women being disadvantaged in terms of their journey to leadership. And that's just effectively case one. So we already know that issue is there. And then let's go back to something like confidence, something that we know affects the vast majority of women in the workplace. Well, if you're struggling with your confidence, it's not just going to be that horrible stomach sinking feeling that you may be experiencing every day and trying to desperately, hide at work. It's going to affect your ability to seize promotions and career opportunities that come your way. It's going to affect your ability to make your voice heard. It's going to affect your ability to potentially go out and meet new sources of business, develop your networks, because you don't feel confident or good enough to go out and do that. It's going to affect the way that you lead or don't lead your team, and that you shy away again for those opportunities to stand out. And you're not going to talk about your amazing strengths and skills. You may not even realize that they're there, because you're in that place where your mind isn't focused on celebrating the positive. You're constantly looking inward and realizing what's negative. So when we think about just those issues associated with confidence, and then the statistics that support how much more difficult it is for women to progress to leadership roles, or even management roles, middle-level management roles, you can see instantly that it's so difficult and it's so challenging. And that's why, for me, effectively, I love to be that support that can help you get over that broken rung in the ladder.
Yeah, the confidence one is an interesting one to me as well. I think, having suffered with that myself in past roles. The caveat, as always, here, of course, is we don't like sweeping generalizations.
No.
But with that caveat, there would always be the specifics, the circumstances, the context at the time will have more of an impact, I suspect, in most cases. Having said that, I do think stereotypes have a lot to answer for in some of these issues as well. So on the confidence one, the classic stereotype is that when applying for jobs or promotions, women generally will look at that and say, well, I don't think I'm qualified, so I won't apply.
Yeah.
Whereas men will be far more likely to look at it and go, well, I might not be qualified, but I've got nothing to lose. I'll wing it. I'll try anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that goes to answering my question from earlier, doesn't it? About why there's so many incompetent men in management positions. It's because they apply for jobs they're not qualified for, and they're more likely to do that than women.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you get to a point that because of that difference, it's only those men who are applying.
Yeah.
So it's going to be one of them who gets the job, isn't it? And that, again, we go back to, we could talk about toxic masculinity. We could talk about the role of diversity in hiring practices. There's so many issues that we could tie back to these little small core problems.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's really important as well, I mean, you just mentioned the words like diversity and thinking of inclusion. We've got International Women's Day. Theme is inspire inclusion. And I've been thinking over the past few weeks what that means to me, what it means for my business, generally my thoughts around that. And, don't get me wrong, this is so important. It's so important that we're having these conversations to start with. It's so important that we are starting to make steps to realising what we, and I say we, almost nationwide, employers, companies, the workforce need to be working on. But I think what can be quite difficult is that we almost see these topics as being so big and so meaty that they're really, really, it's really difficult to break them down. And actually thinking about, it's almost been like, okay, but actually what are the really small actions that you can take every day to create the biggest results to actually help women feel included in the workplace? So there is also a massive piece in looking at those really, really small actions that you can actually take each day to create change.
Absolutely, yeah. Not to trivialize it, but somebody sent me one of these social media clips the other day of some, I think they were New Zealanders, but they were comedians, and their thing is about workplace culture, but making fun of it. And so this little skit that I was sent was a couple of things to make yourself stand out in a meeting. And one of them was repeat whatever the last person said, but in a louder voice. Right. And obviously the joke was they went round that 3 or 4 times, repeating it. Yeah. And then they put it to the audience of what other ideas have you guys got? What have been your experiences of meetings in the workplace? And a woman in the audience said, let a woman speak. Now you can see the obvious joke, which is what they did. They ignored it. But to really underline the point, the man sitting next to her said, let a woman speak. And so the comedians, obviously making a joke of the reality, went, oh, that's a pretty good idea. Yeah, well, good point, well made. But I think that's one of those little behaviours, isn't it, that you're talking about, is actually, and it's not just women, I mean, it's any minority or underrepresented group in the workplace. Yes. The first thing you've got to do is go and have a conversation with those people, listen to them, get their points of view on what's working, what's not, why is it not working. And the same with hiring and that kind of recruitment process. It's no good just putting your job ad on LinkedIn or, I don't know, a newspaper that only old white men read, for example. Right? If you're serious about diversity, you'll go and advertise, you'll go and seek candidates in the places where those groups are, not where your existing demographic lives and spends all of their time. Anyway, let's get off the soapbox. I'll dig out the link and send it to you afterwards as well, because I feel like you'd enjoy it.
Yeah, perfect.
There's a big topic there, and I don't want to trivialize it or not give it enough time. However, I am conscious that we've only got an hour or so for an episode. So 2 other topics that you've mentioned already that I'd like to touch on. I think one of them has been heavily implied, and that's introversion. So being an introvert and being a leader, those are 2 things that many people would never put together. Certainly not in the same sentence, except to say introverts can't be good leaders, for example. Yeah. Which I massively disagree with. Why do you think that is quite a limiting point of view when we're looking at leadership in particular?
Well, it's definitely it's another misconception, isn't it? And a lot of us, I feel like, during the journey of our career, especially, I mean, what am I, 15 years typically into a career now? 15 years ago, I think it's fair to say things were quite different to how they are now in terms of workplace culture and how we saw leaders and our perception of good leaders. And thinking about that, really, our references for leaders have always been someone that is outward going, that isn't afraid to express their voice and express their voice very regularly. Someone that, has to be a real people focused person, spend a lot of time around people. And it's funny, actually, because when I, a few years, I think, into my career, we had the personality test, something like Myers-Briggs. I came out as an extrovert. So very, very happy to put my hand up, make my voice known. I was surrounded by some very big personalities, so that almost probably brought it out in me as well. And funnily enough, over probably the course of, I would say, 7-8 years, I completely changed. But that coincided with me stepping into a leadership role. So for years, I'd almost been more extroverted. For years, I'd had those references around me, especially, I would say, in a more male-dominated environment, where you did have to shout pretty loud at times to be heard in meetings, if I'm being perfectly honest. And that was the way that you did it. And in some ways, you were respected for that. And I think a lot of the pressure that I put on myself, especially being quite young in a senior role, was, oh my goodness, I've got to make my voice heard. In some meetings, people would be watching to see if you were making your voice heard. And if you weren't, they would actually make it known. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I understand that. But at that point, I had no idea how to make my voice heard as an extrovert in my own style. And because I had no idea where to start with that, I put so much pressure on myself, A, to be perfect, to always say the right thing, B, to somehow make myself heard, which I just found really, really difficult. And then if I did sit silent, I would just be berating myself, going, you need to speak up, you need to speak up. So that wasn't pleasant either. And I was probably missing the actually really important parts of what was going on in the meeting. And it just became this real vicious circle for me. And then whatever I did say, I would just be convinced it was wrong. Even if that wasn't the case, I would give myself such a hard time afterwards. And I went through this process for years, and I dreaded meetings, presentations, anything that involved me, I guess, having to take a more leadership role in an external environment. And that only changed when I found coaching. And it helped so much with my communication skills, and it helped me realize the sheer power of an amazing question. And all of a sudden, the penny dropped. And I must admit, when I started the coaching course, I didn't tell anyone at work about it. I didn't tell my manager about it. And one day we're having a conversation, and he just said, you're acting really different. You come across, you're so much more confident. I'm really hearing you speak up and making your voice heard. And I thought, wow, because at that time I was only 3-4 months into the course. And I sat and I thought about it. And at that point, especially a lot of the meetings, because of that sort of time, were online, doing it throughout lockdown. And so that was a slightly different challenge as well, maybe even sometimes a bit harder because you couldn't necessarily get eye contact, or it wasn't almost like a roundtable discussion, especially when we were all trying to get a lid on what Zoom meetings were and that they weren't just a free-for-all of everyone talking over each other. But I thought, oh my goodness, I've got an opportunity to really develop my own style here. And I made sure in one meeting I asked a really good question. And I'd even hear back like, wow, that's a really good question. And I think, yes, I've nailed it. And that's how I started. I thought, I'm just going to ask one good question. I'm going to ask 2 good questions today. If I hear my manager, I don't know, struggling with something or needs a stat, I'm going to jump in. Or if they say something and I can add a question to that, I will. So I developed that style over and over and over again. And it did still feel quite hard. But I became so much more confident at speaking. I wasn't dreading meetings. I was asking great questions that got me noticed. And in my final appraisal, before I handed my notice in and went full time, my manager said to me, "You are now at a leadership level." And that is probably the proudest thing in terms of my previous corporate career I've ever achieved, because I'd become a leader, I'd found my style, and I'm a proud extrovert.
There's a lot of interesting elements in that story, I have to say. I think one of them, when it comes to sort of introversion and extroversion and ambiversion, and sorry, Tom, if you're listening, I can't remember all the phrases. I think context has an impact. I don't think you are always an introvert or always an extrovert. I think, and from your story, I think that it bears that out, because there were moments there where the feelings and the behaviours that you're describing would be classically associated with introversion, even though you self-identify perhaps and were tested as an extrovert. And that is interesting to me, because I think there's lessons in terms of an organisational culture that almost suppresses the extroverts to the point that they don't feel able to speak up. There's also lessons there about the power of a coaching mindset for managers, not just managers really, but anyone in a meeting or workplace, to use that sort of questioning technique, that methodology, to be less introverted maybe, or at the very least make themselves feel heard. Yeah. And I think the other really interesting aspect of that is the way you were perceived once you started doing that. And there is a contrast there, isn't there, between the meetings where it's almost like might makes right, isn't it? Like the shouting loudest is the one who gets heard and everyone else is ignored. Versus suddenly you're just asking really clever questions at the right moment, and suddenly people are taking notice and saying, "Wow, you were totally different. Yeah, you're a leader now because you asked as opposed to trying to shout people down." And that is a very interesting lesson as well, I think.
Yeah, it was an amazing process to go through, I must admit. And, you know, thank goodness that I found coaching, because it really did get me through the last few years of a corporate career, and also be able to leave that corporate career, I would say, on a high note and achieving something that I was really proud of, because I obviously decided that directorship wasn't for me. And I'd had to cope with that sense of failure and just feeling like whatever I did, I couldn't get there. I was just so unhappy. And instead, I'd done it my way, which I just, it really, really made me so happy.
Good. Well, I'm pleased to hear it. And thank you for sharing that story as well.
No problems.
That does rather lead us into the next question I have. So we've talked about confidence quite a lot. Yeah. Something that we've really touched on but not given name to yet is imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And so those are two, they're quite often conflated, I think, but they are different and separate.
Yes,
I don't want to call them problems, but challenges, things that people face, particularly in leadership roles at various stages of their career. So you've spoken already about your experience with confidence. Yeah. What about imposter syndrome? And then from where you are now, what do those things mean to you today?
Yeah, that is a great question. And 100% in terms of imposter syndrome, yes. I suffered really, really badly with imposter syndrome. And again, so much learning, because confidence was written, plastered over 10 years of appraisal forms, maybe even 12. I've got the appraisal forms, and if I highlighted every time I mentioned confidence, it would just be all yellow. And I had a great manager. And, you know, we'd almost sort of sit there and all have a laugh or have a little shrug about it. And it would always be like confidence, confidence, confidence. That was the word. But actually, I realised, and again, when I started coaching, confident at what? What did confidence actually look like? And as soon as I could identify that, it was an absolute game changer. And confidence, I've learned, is almost about outward projection. It's about feeling happy. It's about feeling comfortable in your own skin. It's about the way that you're expressing yourself, your tone. But actually, I realized that I'd sort of smothered myself in this confidence blanket, when actually a lot of that voice, and a lot of the voice that was almost my downfall in terms of my mental health, was that inner voice. It was that inner voice telling me I'm not good enough. I'm about to be found out. What if I'm constantly wrong? I must admit, I did back myself in a way, and I always did see that I'd put a lot of hard work in to achieve my success. But when I was thinking, oh my goodness, okay, I'm not going to make this directorship position, I instantly turned on myself, that I'd done something wrong, I'd failed. And that really was my inner voice of imposter syndrome. And sometimes that's incredibly difficult when you've got confidence, you've got imposter syndrome, and you're not really following or able to follow, because, you know, when you're having a tough time, it's also then tenfold so difficult to have that internal reflection. I hadn't really figured out where those voices were leading. And I always felt incredibly conflicted sometimes, because I could go in and I could look very happy and that I was having a great time. If I went to networking events, I would present myself incredibly well. I would back myself, I would back my work, I would back the company. And as a leader in the office, I would say I was quite a confident leader. But actually, that was very different to the voices in my head of going, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And that made me feel incredibly conflicted, because I was like, but I'm putting out a confident version of myself at times, but then I'm feeling like complete turmoil because that's not how I'm feeling or not feeling in a lot of other situations. And I just couldn't understand how to reconcile that. And again, it's taken a coaching journey to make myself comfortable, to understand what confidence is, to understand where my imposter syndrome comes from, and actually really, really positive things I can do to address that going forward. And I don't know whether it's me, I don't know whether it's society, I don't know whether it's a misconception, but I think we can have a lot of thoughts in our head that go, oh, there's a sort of a one-size-fits-all solution. There's a one-time fix. Actually, you're constantly going to be working on this. It's not a one-time quick solution. But if you keep working, you keep investing in your mindset, you will get there.
I think that's a good message to end that answer on, definitely.
Yeah.
And it is definitely true, especially I think with imposter syndrome. Like it will probably never go away.
Yes.
You will always be struggling with that. I know I always have been.
Yeah.
And it did make me chuckle as well when you're talking about confidence there and the appraisals. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I've struggled with confidence, the thing that has always made it worse is somebody telling me I'm not confident enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. And someone's just sitting there agreeing with you, nodding their head, going, no, you're not.
And you just, or worse, telling you are when you didn't realise that, and it's almost one of those things sometimes where you feel like, am I being sabotaged here? Like, are they trying to knock my confidence on purpose? Yeah. And then that feeds into your imposter syndrome as well, and just becomes a vicious circle. What's quite important, though, in separating those two concepts is that they're not always connected, because exactly as you've described in your story, a very outwardly confident person can quite often be suffering the worst with imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And again, it's back to these sort of problems of our work culture and the way we view work as a society, this whole fake it till you make it mentality, as though that's a good thing, that's something we should aspire to.
Yes.
And again, we play into leadership here because it's all down to, at the end of the day, in my opinion, authenticity and honesty. If you can be honest about what you're good at and what you're not good at.
Yes.
If you can be honest about what you do and don't know, it makes you a better leader. Yeah. It can also help you, I think, with imposter syndrome, because you're not so worried about being found out if you've already told people.
Yeah.
Which is very oversimplification, but that was something that helped me anyway when I last went through it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Like, I must admit, if I've got one terrible habit, it's the fact that I'm and definitely in my career, I was very, very open and honest about what I thought I was good at and what I wasn't. But I would always take it one further in terms of what I wasn't good at. And I realized actually that I was using a lot of self-depreciating language and going one step further to really put myself down. And that's something, again, that almost links back to that imposter syndrome of going, okay, well, I've been open, I've been honest, I'm putting myself in a place that I'm more comfortable, but I'm just going to take that opportunity to just tell myself again that I don't think I'm good enough. And again, it's almost that negative mind chatter and those little adjustments that you can make in your mindset that you go, yeah, my strength doesn't lie with this, but I am really, really committed to learning and I'm going to enjoy that process, rather than me going, yeah, I'm not good at that. And when I did that, I was literally terrible. It's such a difference.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think a big part of that honesty has to be being honest with yourself as well, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the best ways I've ever found of improving confidence is to first improve competence. So if you are good at something, you'll become more confident at it. And that's not always the answer for imposter syndrome, but I think it can help, certainly.
100%. With I remember on the coaching course, there's this amazing coach, and when we talked about confidence, she just went, confidence is practice. The more you do it, the more you will feel confident. But confidence is also, it can be a tricky thing because it's a nominalization, which means that we have this air that we go confidence. And as soon as you go, what is confidence? You go, I don't know. So it's always so much more helpful if you can think confident at what, because then that leads you to taking practical actions. And I always say with confidence, chase actions, not feelings, because the actions will get you to confidence.
As well, it's somewhat in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
So, and we tend to look at it through our own lens. So we go back to, say, the introvert and extrovert conversation. The extrovert would see confidence as that classic outgoing, well-spoken, not afraid to speak their mind and speak up loudly quite often. Whereas for the introvert, actually, it takes quite a lot of confidence to sit in silence.
Yeah.
Other people might view it as an awkward silence. The introvert might be quite confident just sitting there perfectly happy waiting for the next person to speak.
Yeah.
So I do think, again, it's context and perception, isn't it? It's always interesting.
It is.
Another foible of human behaviour there.
Yeah, I mean, I learned something, like apparently we share the same definition of a word with 5% of the world's population. So, again, I mean, this comes down to something classic for leadership as well. When we say a word, the chances are your definition of it is not going to be the same as someone else's. And that's why it's so important to know what that means, what that word, what that definition actually means to you.
Which brings it, of course, back to coaching, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you say that, what do you mean?
Yes, exactly.
What is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned in your career so far?
So that is definitely without a doubt, getting really clear on what you're doing. Now, this may sound ridiculously simple, but I am massively of the opinion, if you don't understand the work stream, the task, strategy, the deadline, anything associated with what you're working on, then it is going to be almost impossible to help your team understand it. And that's going to cause confusion. It's going to cause chaos, quite frankly, and it's going to cause everyone to be unhappy. And I must admit, because of the role that I had at the age that I had, I think, to be honest, I lacked experience because I'd gone into it so young. A lot of it was very, very technical. So what I decided to do was always spend a little bit extra time really understanding what was needed to be done. So the work streams, the strategy, the deadlines, if I needed any clarity on that, I would go and seek that clarity from my manager or chat it over with someone more senior, so that when I booked in that time with a team member, I could present it incredibly clearly. And that ultimately, yes, okay, that could be seen as annoying in terms of having to invest more time or work a bit later. But it worked so much better in terms of the outputs, in terms of the work streams, and also just having a happy team. And sometimes I thought, well, maybe I'm going a bit mad, or maybe I'm sort of overloading people with information when they don't actually need it. And I remember a colleague going to me, "Oh, Camilla, you're one of the only people that sits down and explains how actually the bit of work that I'm doing links into the project and how it relates to the wider success of the project." And I thought, wow, okay, that's great. I'll keep on doing it. So yeah, it was a real lesson. It took some time to master, but just getting really, really clear on what I was doing.
There's particularly powerful behavior there, I think, around giving people the context of what they're doing, because nobody wants to feel like a cog in the big machine that never has sight of the outcome. So it's make sure you explain to people what they're doing, where it fits in the bigger picture, and why it matters.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, then they're going to lose interest pretty quickly. We can talk about staff engagement or happiness at work or job satisfaction. All of these things ultimately come out from understanding the value you're bringing to your organisation. And it is leadership's job, in my view, to make sure people do understand that.
Yeah, massively, because if you're there, I mean, I was also lucky, I guess, staying in the same company and having started that journey literally on my work experience. I knew how I really enjoyed being managed and being led, and what made me feel fulfilled personally and professionally. And there's the classic saying of treat others how you would like to be treated, and that's exactly what I did. I mean, for me also, that was a massive culture of a company, but just having gratitude and saying thank you, I couldn't almost stress that more as being so important. It is amazing what gratitude and a thank you can do. And as much as I was really grateful for the success in my career, I did never ever fail to recognize that was a massive team of people that were behind me, and that if I didn't have them, oh my goodness, it would have just been absolute chaos. I couldn't have done it without them.
The flip side of all of that is if you don't have the same expertise as your team, and for a lot of leaders that is the case because it's differing skill sets, it is quite important sometimes. And I think there's a lot of value in being able to do this well. Call it the coaching approach if you like, call it leading with curiosity, but ask genuine questions to which you don't know the answers.
Yes.
Like we're not lawyers on TV legal dramas all the time. Like that whole saying about never ask a question if you don't already know the answer does not apply to leadership, in my opinion, and nor should it. I think there is a lot to be said there for building that rapport with your team, building up engagement, making them feel valued, making them feel heard and listened to. Like if you ask a question, you've automatically got to listen to the answer then, haven't you? So I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I've done that myself, having been in that position, not because I was a particularly clever leader at the time, just because I was in no way as qualified or intelligent as the people I was managing. And so there were times where I was just like, guys, I don't understand this. Can someone explain it, please?
Yeah. And that's it. And that is the beauty of just going, actually, I don't have to have this all covered. You're working with people that are, specialists in their own disciplines. I worked with a technical drawing team. Yes, okay, I understood the ins and outs of CAD to be able to get myself there. But there's absolute beauty in going, okay, well, this is what we need to do. How do you think that we can get there?
And it may not be the way you would have done it.
Yeah,
that's fine. Sometimes that's good because they might have a better way of doing it.
Oh yes, a lot of the time.
Exactly, yeah. But if you don't ask, you'll never know.
No, you don't know.
Yeah, I do quite like as well, treat others how you want to be treated. I think I prefer treat others how they want to be treated.
Yeah.
Because that means you've got to have the conversation and find out how they want to be treated.
Yeah, so true. I think a lot of it comes to reflect like being authentic with your values and aligning your behavior, and also just accepting that others have their own values, and, you know, really encouraging them to feel like they can be open and be themselves. That's a massive part of, you know, people being happy at work, is that they don't feel like they're having to come to work pretending to be someone else, or fitting into a corporate mold, or having to come with all the right answers, or be 1,000,000% efficient. It's just the fact that you can come to work just being you.
That's one of the biggest mistakes that a leader can make, actually, is just relying on that assumption, isn't it? So whether it be, you know, I assume because I communicate best verbally that everyone in my team will as well, therefore I'm only going to discuss important information verbally. I'll never email it because I don't like that. It's too impersonal. And there's an assumption there. You know, half of your team might prefer written communication so they can refer back to it later, and they don't have the pressure to remember everything. For example. So leads into the next question, really, which is, what do you think is the most common mistake that leaders will make?
I would say not listening. Like, for me, listening is the key to so many amazing things, because if you are listening, you are giving someone that respect, you are giving them that space for them to express their thoughts, express their opinions, and make their voice heard. We know that then that nurtures confidence, and we know that that nurtures someone just feeling happy that they can go. And, you know, a lot of conversations, and obviously almost basically growing up at my job, I had a lot of conversations with my manager with like personal things that were going on in my life as well. And so the ability for that person to be listening when maybe you are having, I don't know, a very work focused meeting, gives you real confidence that actually, if you've got a problem in your personal life that is inevitably more personal, that you can also go to them and share that problem as well. It is so, so key in just building trust. And also, when you listen, like you were saying earlier, you can give those great quality answers, and you can understand what someone actually really, really needs. So it's not about what you think they need, it's about what that person does really need.
Oh, absolutely agree there. And it's so fundamental as well to just the simple, in inverted commas, the relatively simple process of just getting someone to care about their job and do their best effort. Because, you know, I'm sure everyone has had at least one job like that in their career, where it's just do as you're told, don't ask questions. Those are the jobs you care the least about, you work the least hard at. You're probably quiet quitting, to use the current popular phrase. And there's a huge lesson in there for leaders. If that's the way you treat people, that's what you'll get back. It's a very reciprocal thing. It's not complicated. It's not difficult to understand.
You know, the majority of the time, if you're putting out a certain behaviour, it will be mirrored.
Absolutely. It's that old truism, isn't it? You know, you get out of it what you put in. So okay, changing tack then. What would you say has been your best experience of being led?
Wow. I was in my role for 14 years. I had the same manager throughout all of that time. So it was a journey. But I feel very lucky. And, you know, I will also say, like, it was a male manager who was amazing at supporting and championing me. And there were a lot of positives that I've taken away from the process. And I do attribute a lot of my support to his mentoring, all of the time and effort and energy that he invested in me, and making sure that I was very clear about my work, which was then behaviour that I could mirror to supporting other colleagues. And I think, definitely, he had a lot of leadership qualities and a lot of entrepreneurial qualities, actually, that have stood me in amazing stead for my own business. But I think in terms of that listening piece, that support piece, and he was also, at times, I feel almost incredibly brave to let me have the ownership and the responsibility that I did, even in a very, very junior level of my career. And I remember always being so struck by it that he would always come in from a meeting and be like, right, you, this project, this piece of work. And you'd be like, me? Like, I'm going to do that. Like, I'm going to lead that project. I'm going to produce this bit of work, even on my work experience. And he was just like, yeah. So I think him being able to be really happy to give that ownership, and don't get me wrong, help was always there. It was never like, oh, you've got to do that and you're alone. You were always supported on that journey, which was the most lovely thing. But inevitably, that led me to skyrocket the key skills that I needed to do to learn in the early parts of my career, because I was being given the opportunities. And he was never ever precious about work either, which is something that I must admit have been qualities that I've noticed in great founders and great leaders, that they are not precious. If someone came up with a better idea, he went, yeah, go for it. If someone told him he was wrong, he was like, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Why don't we do that instead? This could be the approach. He was always so responsive and adaptable to other people's ideas. Nothing was ever set in stone. Nothing was ever too precious. Nothing was ever like his idea that he had to hold on to. And I think that is an incredible quality of leadership.
There are several tightropes to walk in leadership. And I think one of them is definitely that ability to let your people feel ownership of tasks, ownership of their jobs even, but also know that there is that support there if they get stuck.
Yeah.
And it's a tightrope, because it's so all too easy to fall off on the one side and just be constantly looking over their shoulder and making sure they're doing it right.
Yeah.
Or on the other side, to just give them a job and disappear and they don't see you again for 6 months.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a trick. There's a knack to getting that right,
there is. There is.
Practice makes perfect, I guess, as we said earlier.
Yeah, 100%. And he put a lot of time in as well. I mean, he was always the one, in terms of me saying earlier, I had to put a bit of extra time in to get clear. And then I also accepted that, you know, working with more junior colleagues, you do have to put a bit of time in, and that helps them learn, it helps them grow, it helps you get the best work possible. And that's all part of the process. And again, that was something that I massively learned from him. Even though he was a partner in the company at that time, if he needed to spend 2 hours helping me write emails, checking plans, that's what he'd do.
Oh, not so sure about that. Rewriting your emails for you. Oh.
No, it was really helpful though.
Okay.
It was really helpful, and I tell you why. Because doing the job that we do, they are scrutinised, I will say, and some of the documents that we produce can actually be legally scrutinised as well, at appeals and what have you. So they are, they're documents that need to be checked. Let's just say.
Time for the time travel question.
Okay.
If you could go back in time to the start of your career, what would you say to your younger self?
Definitely just believe. And I think there was that part of me. And again, it probably links back to graduating in the recession when there was such a scarcity of jobs. I probably had that mindset, which I don't think was necessarily bad, but I was very lucky to be there. I was very, very grateful for it. And it took me a while in my job to feel like I'd earned my place, that I wasn't at risk of somehow that sort of scenario being swept out from underneath my feet, and I dreamt it all. And actually, I probably didn't believe in myself that actually I'd earned that. I'd worked really, really hard to go from a work experience placement to getting a permanent job in that company. So yeah, it's definitely believe and just enjoy it. I mean, again, my story is all about, I always had that career ladder in my sights. And yes, it got a lot worse and to the end of my 20s, but I always did. So I think also just enjoy being the level that you are, enjoy going to work day to day, enjoy coming home. So that's definitely what I'd tell my younger self.
There's a lot to be said in there for stopping to smell the coffee, I would say. I think the actual cliche is the roses, but that's something that we're in our younger lives are really very good at, isn't it? Is appreciating what you have and not focusing on the future quite so much. But I do find it as well quite an interesting statistic there about, because I've as well graduated very near to the recession and entered the world of work after a year of job searching and training, and then stayed in a job for what is these days a very long time. It was over a decade for me. And I'd never really put those two things together before. Of course I did. It's because at the beginning I was thankful for any job and I was worried I might lose it. So that makes sense now.
It's amazing. It took me a long time to figure out, but all of a sudden I just had one of those light bulb moments of yes, that is why. And it gave me a lot of loyalty, which wasn't a bad thing. And I had a really good experience at that company. But I think there were times where I could have done something different, or I could have explored my options. But that loyalty overrode, I think, that logic.
Yes, for me, I would say there were times when I should have definitely gone and done something else and didn't. But anyway, lessons learned, so it wasn't wasted. I wonder then, because obviously, I mean, in most industries, particularly the tech-driven ones these days, it's not unusual to be changing job every year, but certainly every couple of years. And I wonder with the economic times we've just been through, whether that's about to flip back the other way again. Be interesting, won't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting and tough climate at the minute. You know, I get a lot of DMs on LinkedIn from women in the industry trying to find new jobs. It's not easy. So yeah, if you happen to be someone that's listening to this, please do pop me a DM, because I know it can feel so tricky to reach out, though. I think sometimes you do go into that place. It never makes you feel great if you're trying to look for a role, or even if you're feeling, to be honest, at your wit's end in your current role, and you're in a really, really tough place. It can feel like such a stretch to actually reach out. And so that's always something that I love to say, that no message or anything that anyone says is ever going to be judged. It's just all about providing support.
Leadership Heroes.
Okay, well, we're nearly out of time. I've got one question left for you. It's my favourite question. I hope it's going to be yours as well. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you could pick one person, and they could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, and why?
So I can see also that you're on the edge of your seat for this. So not loads of people know this, but I'm a massive, massive sports fan. One of my favourite sports is actually basketball, NBA over in the States. So gut instinct in terms of who embodies that perfect sort of version of leadership, it's got to be LeBron James for me. I think that he is absolutely phenomenal. And the reason for that is obviously he's an amazingly talented, I would say arguably the best player in the world right now, best player of all time. But I think it's what he embodies. He's older than me. I want to say like 37. He's got to be somewhere he's under 40, like 37, 38. He's still playing phenomenally. So he's great. But it's now for him also about how he leads the team. It's about the culture that he embodies. It's about how he is helping junior players. It is about the example that he is setting for the team and for the organisation. He does a lot of work outside of the team, outside of the organisation anyway. But you see it. I mean, I watch a lot of basketball, and he is incredibly consistent with that culture, the way that he holds himself, everything that he does. And admittedly, I don't know the ins and outs of his training or what he does, but in terms of great players, great leaders, it's not just about having that vision. Of course, his vision is leading that team to victory, but he will also be operating at the micro scale. It's known that LeBron James turns up very, very early to games. He will turn up like hours, almost when like no one is there, including like arena staff, because he will start his prep routine, he will start his practice, he will start his warm up, and he will go through all of that for hours before anyone else even arrives to the venue to really focus on his success at a micro scale. And I'll never forget, I listened to another podcast and they had a former coach of Kobe Bryant talking about Kobe's success. And it's a bit of a tangent, but I love this story. And I think it tracks across to just great leaders and great visionaries, that it is having that vision and knowing how they're going to get there. But it is those micro details. And Kobe Bryant used to go, again, hours early to games. And he would spend hours bouncing the ball up and down on the court in every area of the court. And he was so focused on knowing the areas where the ball would bounce better than others. You'd have a higher bounce, a lower bounce, a more intense bounce, so that he knew wherever he was in that court how best to handle that ball and shoot it. And for me, it's sort of what embodies that leadership. It really is thinking about that bigger picture and holding yourself and the way that you train your culture, the way that you put yourself across to achieve that goal. But it's also knowing all of those micro details and being really, really committed to them that help you achieve that success.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to be said, isn't there, for practicing the craft. I do wonder though, like how, if you're getting there that early and spending all those hours warming up and practicing, how do you have any energy left for the actual game?
That's the training though, isn't it? I mean, that's the training. They do very, very intense training. But again, LeBron James is the leader of that training. So they'll have the regular basketball season, they'll then have an off season, and LeBron James is known as like one of the best, I would say, sort of trainers, hardworking trainers in the off season, because he's obviously now older in terms of what a stereotypical sports person's career would be. He has to put in even more effort in that off season to make sure that he's in the best form when he hits the new season, because it's so much easier to get injured, I guess, to lose that stamina. So again, it's just, I love it. I mean, I must admit, I'm such a basketball fan. I'm such a sport fan. Like, something that personally I want to learn more about is sports psychology, because I love that vision and that mindset of just being, it just is clarity. I feel like sports psychology embodies a lot of clarity, a lot of focus, and just that this is what I'm doing and I will be getting there. And it, especially in basketball, because you have got that team culture and you work, you focus on your goal and you get there. And if you have a setback, it's a setback, but you keep moving.
Now, I'm not a sports fan. I'm not going to pretend to be. Basketball's the one with the sticks, isn't it? I think. No? Yeah. However, even I've heard of him. So there you go. I mean, and we've not had him either as a choice yet for Leadership Heroes. So you get bonus points. Well done.
Yeah.
Because it is a scored exercise, in case I didn't tell you.
Look forward to receiving that.
Yeah, there will be full 360 for you, but no, not really. Yeah, but I think he's known outside of basketball as a good person to work with, as a modern leader, as someone who works really hard as well. So I don't think you necessarily get a reputation like that outside of your industry unless it's really well earned. Yeah, I agree. Well, Camilla, it's been lovely talking with you today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. One last thing I will ask you. Yeah. Any of the listeners would like to learn more about you or what you do or get in touch, where can they go? Yes. So I'm on a few social media platforms. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Instagram. I've also got my website as well. So yes, feel free to come and say hello. Always love to hear from you. Okay, well, I'll pop the addresses in the episode description so everyone can find those easily. That's it from me. Thank you again so much. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. I feel like we've covered so much, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to talk all things career and leadership with you.
Likewise. Thanks again to Camilla there for a brilliant conversation. We touched on some really big and important topics, but I hope, listener, that it has given you some ideas, inspiration, and practical guidance to help you with the challenges you may be facing in your own career. And on the subject of careers, if you would like to reach out to Camilla, learn more about what she does, and perhaps work with her as your career coach, then do check the links below in the episode notes, the description, etc. Thank you so much for being with us today. If you did get something out of this episode, then please do consider leaving us a review or a rating on whichever platform it is you're listening from. I always love hearing the feedback and reading some of the very kind reviews that you've all left over the years, and it's always useful to help me improve as well. I hope you'll be with me again next week when I'll be chatting with keynote speaker, leadership trainer, and fellow podcast host, Juan Alvarado. Looking forward to it already. Talk to you again soon, and in the meantime, be a leader, not a boss.